Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm incredibly excited to present this Q&A with two amazing forward-looking people. One is Olivia Lopez. She's chef de cuisine at Billy Can restaurant in Dallas, Texas, and super incredibly talented. She's from Colima, Mexico, and is really on the leading edge of heritage corn and making masa and nixtamalization and all these exciting things that we'll be talking about today. I also have Juliet Jacobson, who is a partner at Cooks Without Borders, and she designed the site, so she's responsible for all the kind of gorgeousness that you see. And Juliet is a wonderful home cook, and we grew up together, and we grew up eating a lot of Mexican food in Southern California together. And Julie has been experimenting with, we've both been cooking with the heritage corns, and Julie made masa and nixtamal over the weekend. So we'll both have a lot of questions. And then we also have Jorge Gaviria, and Jorge founded a really amazing company called Masienda, and he's based in Los Angeles. And he, I'll let him tell you the story, but the short version is those of you who read our story know, he sort of became interested in heritage corn, and then started discovering small scale farmers in Mexico, and wanted to become involved with them. So with that, I will let you take the floor, Jorge, and maybe if you could tell us a little bit about, what gripped you about these small scale farmers and what they were doing, and why it's important that we know about it and pay attention to it.
Yeah, thanks you guys for having us all together to talk about this on a Wednesday. Is today Wednesday? Wednesday afternoon.
Yes.
I started Masienda back in 2014 when I was working at a restaurant called Blue Hill at Stone Barns, and I think the main impetus was just really kind of understanding the lengths that we would go to for sourcing these these grains, these proteins, everything we did, all the ingredients for our menu. I recognized that was sort of out of step with the foods that I grew up with. And so when I would go home and I would make myself, rice and beans, a tortilla, there was really no connection like the one that I had with the foods that I was working with at Blue Hill, and really any other culinary experience I'd had up to that point. There was like a very, really strong emphasis and ethos around, connection to farmer and place. And so that really was the kind of the germination of the idea. It was just, I happened to want to choose the most challenging ingredient there was to connect with, because it's just, why not? And corn was that ingredient. My idea, and kind of the way I wanted to elevate the ingredient experience, was to start a tortilleria, like a tortilla bakery, but like a tartine bakery for tortillas in New York City. Mm-hmm. And I needed a supply chain to kind of make that happen that would tell that story in a really unique way. And after months and months of research, I ended up in Mexico, where corn originates, and I realized that there was a huge opportunity to just connect a lot of dots for creating an impact-based business that was, had a step in the food world, the restaurant world, but also, creating, social, environmental, cultural impact.
Okay, so
did you ever open up the tortilleria?
Not yet. No, my wife is really, we both met in the restaurant industry, and she's very protective of our experience. But I'm trying to open up like a small tasting room cafe in Los Angeles. So more on that soon, hopefully. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I ended up starting really kind of just building a supply chain first for a few years, and that was just sourcing this corn from these smallholder farmers who all lived at or below the international poverty line, but also happened to be growing some of the greatest quality ingredients in the world. They just didn't have a market for any surplus they had. So, the model very clearly became, if we can create a sustainable place for offtake, for purchasing this, retail prices at wholesale quantities from folks who have something to sell that's surplus for what they would produce for themselves. Let's see how that works. And we started with a group of about 12 farmers, and it evolved into about 2,000 sort of today that we work in that kind of constellation, that network. So it's amazing. I mean, to be able to provide impact in communities that need it, to also have a hand in preserving tradition and how at least being a steward of that in any way we can, a support to that. And then, here on this end, to be able to, I think our job has really been to educate as much as we can around what this food is and how it's made. And I think that fosters a connection to not only, the culture and the people, but, I think just an appreciation for, where things come from as well. And that's what we do. Yeah, we are a one-stop shop for Masa, like a vertically coordinated supply chain, one-stop shop for Masa. Like Third Wave Coffee does for coffee, we do for corn.
And it's really, really cool because your website, not only can you buy the products, and what I love is that you can buy, and we're going to get to this in a second with Olivia as well. You can buy the dried corn if you want to nixtamalize, but you can also buy masa harina made from the corn that you guys have nixtamalized. So still be able to experience that heritage corn, even if you're not going to go through the trouble of nixtamalizing. But also you have, you talk about education. Your site has such amazing videos and stories and recipes. And it's really an incredible wealth of information and cool stuff. So Olivia, how did you become, I know that like some of the things Jorge just talked about in terms of the culture and the farmers, I know those are all things that have long been important to you. Can you tell us please about like how you sort of got into this movement and where you are in it?
Thanks for calling it a movement, Leslie, by the way. Thank you. I appreciate that. That's good.
I think it's very important. 2 years when I took a break from restaurants here in Dallas. I went back to Mexico, and just seeing all this little places and all this little culture that it's about to disappear, and it's close if we don't support that. And I think it starts with us as Mexicans, and as showing all the different types of corn, the culture where it's coming from. I think that's the important thing. After I took the break, I went to Mexico 6 months and started going to little towns, visiting, listening to people, listening to their stories and background. I was like, right, this is great. It's a great story behind it, and it starts with us to bring back and help out all the communities there, So when I got back, I was like, hey, this is perfect. I'm gonna start working on corn. That was my idea. That's where I got everything from.
So, and did you know, Olivia, how to, by the way, first of all, thank you everybody for being here. I'm sorry for not saying that right off the bat. And I apologize for technical glitches like we're fuzzy or we disappear or the sound is terrible, and trying to deal with that with Crowdcast, which is just a constant struggle. So I apologize,
Olivia,
and we'll try to sort that out. Yeah, Olivia, we can't see you now.
I can still see her.
Oh, you can? Okay. Well, presumably she'll come back. Hopefully she'll come back. Anyway, I can still hear you. But
perfect.
Olivia, how did you know how to now you're back. How did you figure out how to proceed and how to source the corn that you wanted, and what was that like?
That was the hardest part. Coming back to the US, that was the hardest part. I think Masienda is the only place that I've seen that offers heirloom corn, or at least the one that I was looking for. Most of the companies that I reach out to, because I've been very specific, I'm doing the whole process of the nixtamalization. Most of the companies that I reach out, nobody got back to me. And they actually sell like big pieces of equipment, for a bigger scale, restaurant or a tortilleria. I got lucky through another chef to find out about Masienda in LA. which I was very, very, very surprising. I was very, very surprised to see the quality of product that you guys offer, by the way.
Thank you.
And and I have to say that it's kind of amazing as a home cook to be able to get product that I mean, when you started, Jorge, I think the first chef that you were working with, sourcing wise, was Enrique Olvera when he was opening Cosme in New York. Isn't that right?
That's right. Yeah, I had checked his coat at Blue Hill for an event, and I was like, he'll remember me. He'll be our first customer. And it worked out. Yeah.
I love the way that happens.
It's like starting the mailroom.
Rockefellers. Yeah.
So, but at this point, a lot. I mean, actually, I'm curious about this. Like, we know some of the extremely well-known chefs who you're working with. So we have. Can you maybe tell us about some that everybody may know about, and then maybe give us a sense of, like, how deep is this movement at this point, or is it really just this sort of upper tier of cutting edge chefs?
Well, there's obviously Olivia Lopez, which is great. Very exciting. We've got, I think it's been an evolution. I think, like, the analogy I always use is, the Devil Wears Prada scene. Like, I'm gonna totally say that I've watched this movie not only once but probably a few times. And there's one scene, yes, great, and Meryl Streep, amazing, where Meryl Streep is, like, scolding Anne Hathaway for saying, you think you're not participating in fashion because you just went to, like, TJ Maxx to buy this sweater that I don't care about. That was actually, like, it took years for that to get to the point where you were able to participate in that type of consumption. Like, started at an Oscar de la Renta fashion show 3 years ago, and now it's on this, like, clearance rack. So whether you think you're participating in it or not, you are. And there's this sort of same idea in food or any culture. There's this, it starts in certain sort of in the hands of kind of like maybe it's a higher price point. It's a little more complicated. There aren't efficiencies around it. So naturally, I think a high-end restaurant is sort of a place that gravitates toward this. And then they have very, very, very salient platforms from which to communicate what they're doing, and they're very compelling storytellers. And so before you know it, it's not just high-end chefs, it's the cooks that they used to work with or they used to work for them. It's it's restaurants that are not just located in coastal cities, they're really spreading around around the country and around the world. And so that's really what we've seen over the last 8 years, has been that kind of diffusion, slowly but surely, and it's now making a kind of a jump into the consumer space. Home cooks are really interested and excited about doing this too. So yeah, from Enrique Olvera to Olivia Lopez to Taco Maria we work with in Costa Mesa. We work with hundreds of chefs today. The coolest thing to me is just seeing the attention to detail and, like, the confidence that people have to kind of embark on this. Whereas before, I think we were talking about this offline, when Olivia was looking to buy a mill, that was the same situation I was in when I was trying to coach restaurants on how to buy our products. Like, if you didn't have a mill that was efficient and but also inexpensive enough to do this, like, you probably weren't going to spend $7,000 to $10,000 on this huge piece of equipment that you're going to use for half an hour a day. So we've really, I think our role has been to not only provide the ingredients, but the resources, the content, and then the actual hardware to get it done. Without that, I think it can't continue to grow. I think we're actually right at the precipice of, like, a really big kind of explosion of what the movement's all about. And people are really excited about it.
Do most of the chefs who you supply, like Olivia, grind their own? They buy corn, maize from you, and they grind it themselves?
Yeah,
wow.
It's Masa is a very folkloric tradition. It's not something that, you can really find a lot of information on that feels like consistent mostly, and I think, like, sufficient. Because there's a lot of little pieces, around in the process that are very feel-based, they're very tactile. So it's something that for us, as we've had to, sort of coach folks, because our business depends on their ability to understand how to use our product. We have kind of been able to, connect all of these different data points over the years. I think now to really feel like there's a cohesive strategy to doing this. there are plenty of variables, just like making coffee. You know, like you could have a pour over, you could have an espresso, you could have a cold brew. They're all one way to make coffee, but there's not any single way that's better than another. And so the same thing is with masa. We just try to teach people what those variables are so they can kind of play to what they like best.
But it seems like there's this sort of broad division where if you're a home cook, and maybe also if you're a restaurant chef, Olivia, I'm not sure, where it's like you're going to nixtamalize or you're not. Like you're going to be working from the masa harina or you're going to be making your own. I'm saying it wrong. I know it's nixtamal, right? It's niche. It should be nixtamal. Right?
Nixtamal, you could say nixtamal. I say nixtamal all the time. It's fine.
Like I go by nixtamal.
Yeah.
But yeah,
so, but can you tell us before you got your molonito, you were working with the masa harina, right? Isn't that right, Olivia? Or
yes, it works. It works just fine. I use the ones from Masienda because you guys sent me 2 different kinds, the white olotillo and the blue corn, maíz azul. It works just the same way. It works perfect for most of the recipes, tamales, tortillas, and everything else. The difference once you're grinding, and you can correct me, Jorge, it's you can change the textures that you want, how fine you want your masa, or if you want it a little thicker, I will say. That's probably the only difference, and the smell of the corn that you're cooking at home, or you know, like seeing the whole process of the corn. But the masa harina works just fine.
So, Juliet, do you want to tell us, since you know my experience, I only made pozole. I made nixtamal with the corn, and then I made pozole, which was wonderful. And as I wrote in a story about it, I feel like it's a really wonderful and important thing for everybody who's interested in Mexican cooking to go through at least once. I found it to be very labor intensive because I was removing each little tip, each little cabeza, and I didn't even use a knife. I always like using my fingernail, and it took forever, but it was okay because it was a cool thing to be doing. And then Olivia told me afterwards that if you freeze it overnight, it's actually really easy to do it. But Juliet actually went through that and made pozole, and then also made some nixtamal and made masa from it. So Juliet, can you tell us what that was like as a civilian like me? Like what is it like to do that?
Well, I mean, none of it is very complex, but when you're doing it for the first time and you're sort of nervous, it's like, I read other sources. I watched all of Jorge's videos, and I wasn't sure about how much cal to put in. And then I read Diana Kennedy, and she said, "Oh, you can't even get anybody in Mexico to tell you how much because I get so intuitive, Oh, it's a handful." And anyway, so then I got a little more relaxed. It didn't seem to be that critical. But I bought a corn from Masienda. I can't remember. It's yellow. It's from Oaxaca. It starts with a B.
Bolita.
Yeah.
Bolita.
And it said I learned from the Masienda site that you could use it both for making masa or for pozole. So I nixtamalized one batch, and I set some aside for pozole, and I had my husband remove all those little cabezas. So that was good. And then I turned some into masa. But I think that the masa, I don't have a molinito, so I just used my food processor. But I don't think I ground it fine enough. And so it was very delicious, but the tortillas didn't work out very well. They definitely got nowhere near puffing. And they just, as a result, they were sort of a little gummy in the middle, and they just weren't good. But the pozole was really good. I had some leftovers for lunch today.
Oh, good. Good. Compliments of your husband.
Yes.
Yes, he's a good husband.
The other experience that I had with it is that it took a lot longer for the corn to get to that al dente stage. I just kept boiling it because even though it was way past the time that I thought it was going to take, it still tasted like raw corn, and it was still a little bit of crunch. So I just kept at it, and eventually it got there, and I think it worked out fine. So I think really the only pitfall I fell into was not grinding enough. So I'm going to try it again and just grind it to a really, really, really fine paste.
So you were grinding.
We
in
got
your
a video
food
on that if you
processor.
want, Juliet, online that we uploaded. Maybe it was after you went through the process, but
Okay.
it kind of goes through two ways to kind of, once you get to that, once you've ground it for long enough, it's usually probably quite wet, just so it works in your food processor. So
Right.
you have to kind of either balance that with dry masa harina, or you have to actually like bake it to kind of extract some of that moisture.
I added some dry Masienda masa harina.
Oh, good.
And so I think it got to a good moisture level. I think it just wasn't ground fine enough.
Yeah.
So Betty is asking, any pro tips for nixtamalizing at home, which is a really good question from the pros.
Yeah.
I mean, question for the pros.
Okay. So this is what I usually do personally at home. I start the corn that I'm gonna do. I do, about 1 or 2 spoons of the caul. I let it bring to boil, and then once it's boiling, I let it simmer. I don't know if you agree with this, Jorge. I like to pick a little bit of the corn with a spoon. Once you see the skin coming off, that means it's close to. Once the skin start coming off, I let it go for another 10 minutes and I turn it off, let it sit overnight. And if you do it early, you can let it sit for about 8 hours. 8 to 12 hours. And then after that, that's when you grind. That's the process that I've been doing at home. And that's probably what I remember my grandma doing as well.
So, okay, so that's interesting. Did you, Juliet, when you were nixtamalizing, were you able to see when the corn was at that point?
No, the skins. I expected the skins to be like garbanzo bean skins. When you're boiling garbanzo beans from dried, the skins are very obvious. And I found that the skins on the corn they're much more delicate and not as clear to see.
You
it's
have
almost
to
like
grab.
a slime.
Yes, you grab the corn with your hands and you kind of like rub it, and then you're gonna start seeing this little skin coming off. I don't know if you, Jorge, have a better way to describe it.
Yeah, so I'd say one note on just quantities of cal. I mean, there's obviously like if you have the feeling and you've been doing it your whole life, as Olivia and her family have, there's definitely like a feel to it that you can jump into. I find measuring it 1% of the cal to the actual quantity of corn that you're using is like it's a foolproof way to kind of attack it at home if you have a scale. And it's not that much. A little bit goes a long way. So what happens is that when that cal goes in the water, it's actually more cal than can actually dissolve in the water. So that's why you see when you start to actually cook it, there's still like a white sort of cloudiness to the water. We actually want that because once the corn and the cal go to work, the water and the corn and the heat go to sort of work on that corn, some of that cal is actually going to enter into the corn itself and kind of break up and disrupt all the cell walls inside. So you have like all of the components easily accessible to bind later on. That's a lot. 1% cal is plenty. And no matter what the application is. So 1% cal to corn. And then, you look for basically, I'd say, because all corns are not created equal, moisture just with beans, some might take longer to cook than others, really just kind of focusing on what is it? The biggest two things are the skins, like when you rub it between your fingers, do the skins easily come off? If they do, you're almost there. And the second thing is that, when you take a bite, it should start to actually taste like a tortilla, not like gritty, raw corn. So if you can, taste the corn kernel before it cooks so you know what you're going for. You don't have to swallow it or chew that much, but kind of in the direction you're developing toward once you kind of have that reference point. And then you just turn off the heat when both those conditions are met. Skins and flavor.
Okay, so that's the nixtamalization part. I know like Julie and I have compared notes about making tortillas in general. And I didn't, let's see, I guess I made a couple tortillas with the masa that Olivia gave me. And I also made some tortillas from the masa harina, from the Masienda masa harina. And I felt like before that, using other masa harina or whatever, I was pretty confident in my tortilla making thing. And then I don't know, like using this, like maybe it was like after I watched, like, first of all, Jorge's tortilla making video. I guess it's like a 2 or 3 part video. It is the best thing. It is like the best video, the best like visual aid to tortilla making anywhere I've ever seen. It's so cool. But of course, Jorge's tortillas puff perfectly and gorgeously. And I watched Olivia make one in the kitchen at Billy Can Can the other day, and hers just, it's like she just talks to the tortilla and it puffs. And so, and I was looking at the heat under Olivia's. She was doing it in a cast iron skillet. And I know, Jorge, you talked about the importance of like really pretty high heat. So I think at home I got much higher with my heat than I had been accustomed to, and maybe that threw me off a little. I was unable to really get much of a puff at all. And I think Julie, you had this. So like, what can you tell us about like
how to get a puff?
Puff wisdom, please.
Yeah. A puff is when the tortilla expands into kind of a balloon, is like the most beautiful expression of that act. But a puff is achieved by moisture that is trapped inside of the tortilla that then meets heat. And when that heat meets that trapped moisture inside, it expands in the form of steam, and it creates a steam pocket inside. The puff is really, if you're using masa harina, there's really only, I'd say the 2 most important things that you can think about are really moisture is the biggest. Usually if you don't have enough moisture in the masa, you're not going to have enough moisture to kind of carry you out through 30 to 60 seconds of like searing each side before heat can enter the center and meet some kind of moisture, if that makes sense. So like I'd say the common kind of way to describe it is when you touch the masa, it should be like very, very wet, but not sticking in clumps to your hand. It's like it should be just a kind of at that verge. And the other thing too is every heat source is different, so it might take more time, it might take less time to kind of get a sear on one side. What you want to do is you want to always be thinking about preserving a little bit of like moisture on the inside. So if you're cooking it for too long on one side, it's probably going to dry out, and there's not going to ever be enough trapped moisture to expand into the form of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
How does
and then pressing it evenly too is a really big thing. If you've got kind of too much compression on one side of the tortilla, it's not, one side's going to cook, one part of that tortilla is going to cook faster than another, and you're not going to get an even kind of heat entering the center. If that makes sense.
Are there any like little rubrics for knowing if your Comal is the right temperature, like water dancing on it, if you drop water on it or anything like that?
Oh, that's so great. I wish I would, man. That's a great call. I don't know of one other than just reading it with a temperature, like a laser thermometer. But I'd say I want to say a puff is a wonderful thing, but it's not critical to making a tortilla delicious. Like it's just it's a beautiful thing, but it's a rite of passage, and you just have to kind of get comfortable with it. But you're going to have great things along the way to taste.
Well,
it's not all off.
So we had 3 different Comals going: a Teflon pan, an actual like earthenware Comal from Colombia, and a cast iron, flat. It's not a skillet. It really is like a cast iron Comal. And I mean, for an hour we stood there. There aren't that many variables, right? There's like the thickness of the tortilla, the heat of the Comal, and the moisture of the masa. And we were just going crazy. We couldn't. And then the time that you put it on each side before you.
So it's actually a lot of variables.
4 variables. That's true.
It's like, isn't it like 4 times 3 times 2 times what? But is like, what about like at some point I thought maybe mine were too thin. If they're too thin, will they not puff? And maybe we shouldn't be like fixated on the puff.
I know.
No, I mean, I think like if they're too thin, they can still puff, but just if they're too thin, that means that they're going to cook much faster. So like,
Exactly.
it's a constant dance of like, you know, I always think about just cooking a steak. You know, if you were to try to cook a steak from raw on a pan, you would end up getting like, you know, it would just be hard to control a gradual heat penetration to the center. It's like, it's just a little bit of a harder cook, basically. So when you're cooking a tortilla on a pan, I'd say I start with 15 seconds. Like start with 15 seconds one side, 15 seconds on another. You should still have a little bit of moisture in the center to kind of help you coax along a puff. But it's less a factor of how thin it is and more a factor of, you know, how are you balancing heat and moisture? You know, if you crank up the heat, you're going to cook through it.
Uh-oh.
After less time.
I was showing Leslie the other day. You can see once the tortilla around and start kind of like separating from the pan, you know, like it's cooking around and it's perfect. You know, that's for me the perfect moment to flip it. And it's every corn, it's a little different. And so it's a practicing thing, you know, like you have to notice if it's too dry, you know, if it's a little crumbly, then you add more water. I always have a little container with water right next to me once I start making tortillas, and I grab the masa and I start filling it. I was like, okay, it's a little crumbly, it's a little dry. Then you add a little bit of water, and then you can, and then I press it. And then also the other thing, if you're making masa,
Okay, we'll let her gather
gather her digital thoughts.
Gather her digital thoughts. And but when she showed me the way the tortilla sort of lifts around the edge and then you flip it, that was super helpful.
It's sort of like a cake being done, how it separates from the pan a little bit.
Yeah, a little.
What is the tortilla sticking to the Comal? What is that a symptom of?
The Komal seasoning probably. So, you know, if you're not using a nonstick, you know, scan pan, Teflon-ish kind of pan, and you're using cast iron or carbon steel, you really want to make sure it's well seasoned because it will for sure stick. So something I learned once we started selling Komals is that you actually, it depends on, you know, all oils can be really used for the most part, but the question is like what temperature you're using to cure that oil in. So we actually have a temperature guide on that if you ever want to take a look at it. It's on our site. But yeah, it's all seasoning.
And then when you're done making each tortilla, and then maybe we'll move on to another food and also try to get some questions. If people start dropping questions, and ask everybody, if you have questions, drop them in the bottom, please, where it says ask a question, and we can start getting to them soon. So once you make a tortilla, are you stacking it on a plate? Or are you putting it in a tortilla, like basket, one of those, you know, tortilla pouches? Like, do you need to sort of
tortillero?
Tortillero, yeah. What's the best thing to do as they're coming off of the Comal?
Personally, what I do, I have a napkin that I put them in there, and actually the steam of the tortillas, because they're hopping out, the steam of the tortilla, it actually helps to soften out, and it works even better. So I like to keep them covered as I'm taking them out of the pan. And then keeping in a towel, it really helps to moisture. Personally, I don't know, Jorge, what you will do.
Totally, same thing. Yeah, I actually take the tortillas to like a point where they have like a slight crust on the outside, and then when you put them into the napkin or the kitchen towel and you cover it, they soften, but they still have the toastiness that you would get from like a tostada.
And I think, Jorge, you said that sort of crustiness. Am I remembering right from one of your videos that you said that's like a Oaxaca style of tortilla? Or
it get cut out there for a second. Sorry, Leslie.
Is that little crustiness that you're going for? Do I remember right that you said in one of the videos that that's a Oaxaca style of tortilla?
Yeah, I mean, it's in other places too, for sure. But there's definitely there's a very unique style in Oaxaca that's like a little bit more rustic. It's not quite as, there's less gal usually used as an example. Gal isn't added to the masa afterward, like in Mexico City. There's a very different street food culture and preservation, and so the more cal that's used, the longer the masa lasts. So there are a few different variables, but I find that typically the heat is usually a little bit higher because it's all usually wood, live fire. It's usually over a clay comal, and things are temperature and kind of just the rusticity of it, I think, impacts that crustiness.
I think that the higher the heat, you're gonna get more of that crustiness, and just like Jorge say, most of the comals in Mexico, they're, the temperature is not regulated. They just keep throwing wood to it. So that's, with that being said, it's obviously it's hotter. You're gonna get that crust from it. If you have a temperature control it, and you say, okay, like at 500, this is perfect. It's consistent. You can still cook the tortilla without getting that crustiness. That's the word rustic. It's perfect. Once I think that's like the difference. Once you start controlling the heat, either you get that crustiness, or if you want to just to cook tortilla without getting those little marks, which I think once you get those little marks is the best part. The crustiness and a little rustic to me is the best.
So the other thing is, like, there's a whole lot of things you can do with masa besides making tortillas, right? And I mean, Olivia and I have been working on some recipes, Olivia's recipes, that I'm sort of just putting into shape for lay people. And like one of them is for an amazing pineapple tamal, like dessert tamales, that they're so good, but it's a really, really nice way. And I used the Masienda, one of the now I can't remember which one. It was a blanco one.
Olotillo.
Yeah, that's the one you
blanco.
recommended. Yeah, and it's really nice to work with because first of all, I'm embarrassed to tell you, I had never made tamales before, and I think I had some fear about it, and it was so much fun and like way easier than I thought it was going to be, because it's not hard to fold them, and they just steam so beautifully. Of course, I'm sure part of it is that Olivia's recipe was just like amazing. So that's like a really cool way to work with these products. And also pretty soon on Cooks Without Borders will be Olivia gave me a recipe for Tetelas, which is super cool because you press a tortilla, and then you fill it with refried beans and fold it. And also there's other recipes where you could put cheese in it also, but this one is just beans. So you fold it and then you cook it like that on the Comal once it's folded. And it's like a very different experience of working with the masa. And that one, I used the masa that so far what I've used is the masa that Olivia made from the nixtamal that she made. So next I'm going to try it using the masa harina. But I don't know. Can you guys talk about that? Like it seems like the whole tortilla thing is such a, it's like a sourdough thing, and there's like there's kind of a geekiness about all of this, about like the puff and the nixtamalization, but there's also ways that you can use it that are, somewhat less intimidating and extremely satisfying. So, Jorge, what are some of your favorite ways to, that would be great for home cooks who don't want to have such an involved experience?
I mean, there's so many. We kind of refer to them as masa shapes. So pasta's got, I think, like 400, 300 shapes or something like that. And there's technically like as many, if not more, of masa. But you can kind of distill them into like 30 core ones that then have different regional offshoots and things like that. The Tetelas is one of my favorites. The tlacoyo, which sounds really complicated. I mean, these are basically just like masa pockets that have different shapes. Tlacoyo is probably one of my favorites of all time. It's an oval shaped piece of masa that has a little bit of usually beans or some kind of like fava inside or something like that. But I think the fun thing about masa is that like you think about how pasta has become a part of like American culture, and
Mm-hmm.
we do so many different pastas that have nothing to do with Italy. Like we're putting
Right.
kimchi in pasta, and like we're putting whatever local ingredients we can find and making something taste really delicious. You can use masa the same way too. If you're intimidated
Exactly.
by anything that you've read, and you can just like, if you've got whatever condiments in your refrigerator right now, put an egg on a sope, which is basically just like a little masa pancake. It's one of the easiest things to make. There's so many ways for you to kind of interact with it at your own level. You get a roasted chicken from the grocery store and just start shredding pieces and put it inside of a, I don't know, my gosh, now I can't remember any shapes, but yeah, you can put it on top of a sope.
So it's pretty cool because like even if you don't go ahead.
Oh no, like I was just complimenting Jorge. I think like every state in Mexico has like a little different shape, but they're a little different way of making. Like he was talking about tlacoyos, tetelas, memelas, sopes, tostadas, huaraches. I don't know, all this list that I can start talking about. And there's not really a rule about it. It's more like what you have in your fridge. Because a very common way in Mexico is like you always have beans, you always have salsa. So it's like, and fresh queso, and it's like, all right, perfect. I'm gonna make tetelas. I'm gonna use beans, and I'm gonna put some salsa and queso fresco, and it's ready. It's a meal. But it's not really a set rule. It's more about like, oh, I have these vegetables, I can saute them. I like onions, peppers, whatever you want to use, pretty much. That's what you can put in your tortilla and your taco. If you want to fold it, if you want to roll it, if you want to make flautas, it's an infinite way, or infinite way that you can make with corn or masa, pretty much.
What's the difference between a tetelas and like pupusa?
Pupusa is not from Mexico.
I know it's Salvadoran, right?
Yeah, pupusa I think it's more like a gordita. It's a little round. Tetela, it's in a triangle shape. That's pretty much it. I don't know what's the flour difference. I don't know a lot about pupusas. I don't know if it's out of corn. I don't know if it's out of flour. I'm not quite sure about
They're
it.
definitely out of masa for sure. Yeah, they're out of corn masa.
Yeah,
but they usually put some fat in it too. Is sort of like most traditionally. I mean, they do that in other dishes in Mexico as well. But yeah, very similar to gordita. It's just it's slight, very slight variation on the theme.
Olivia, can you tell us, I mean, you've told us a little bit about this, but just like the way, the role that masa is in, in the kind of households of people that you would be friends with in Mexico or your family, people who aren't like totally gastronomic, like, do they like, would you be buying masa in the neighborhood, or would you be nixtamalizing at home, or do you buy some nice handmade tortillas from a tortilleria, or like what, like how does that kind of work in
everyday Mexican life?
Yeah.
In Mexican life, there are molinos. The way that it used to be, it's you will nixtamalize in your house. You will cook your corn, and you will go to a molino, and they will grind that corn for you, and they'll have the masa ready, and then you go back home and then make all these products, whatever you wanted to make with it. Nowadays, it's a little different. Now it's more like a little, it's going out of your way to buy handmade tortillas. Not everyone makes them. Not everyone uses the heirloom corn. It's actually not very easy to find. This last time I was in Mexico, I have to drive about an hour and a half to find a little spot that had some heirloom corn. So I think it's, in Mexico, it's a little different. It's a culture, another movement that it's happening in Mexico at the same time, right? If you talk about handmade tortillas and stuff like that, it's more like what grandma makes at home. So that's the way it is nowadays in Mexico, or like what I've seen the most.
Yeah. So in the days when people would make the nixtamal at home and then take it to the molino, like how often would they do that? Like how long does the masa, like how long can you
Last.
keep the masa at home? And like, so how often do you have to do that?
The way my grandma used to do it, it was probably every 3 days, 3 to 4 days.
Huh.
Families that are bigger, so
Mhm.
they will grind, 3, 4 kilos of masa, and it's
Mhm.
eaten, in 3 meals. Lunch, either can be breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Mhm.
So you fly through that. But 3 or 4 kilos every 3 days, probably.
Wow.
Yeah. So we have a great question from Chloe. She's asking, is there a significant flavor difference with the heirloom varieties as the more common ones? So the more common ones being like the more, I guess, industrial corn. Jorge, what do you say about that? And then I'd love to know also, Olivia, your perception of that.
I mean, definitely. I started a company. I started a company around it after tasting the difference myself for the first time, and just couldn't believe like what I'd been missing out on. So yeah, I mean, I think if you do a side by side comparison, it's still to this day, any day I'm feeling really disconnected or I'm like really frustrated with work or something like that, we will do these regular tastings with our team and new team members, and I'm always just like, oh my gosh, this is such a, it's important to celebrate that difference for sure. But yes, absolutely, and they're also very different in between those heirloom varieties too. Just like an heirloom cherry tomato versus I don't know, aroma tomato versus, there's that biodiversity tastes very different.
Yeah.
When you do those tastings, are there sort of, aromas or words that you use, texture things like what is the language around describing the different flavors, or is that just not such a thing? Is it like wine, or is it like, or coffee tastings, or is it more like heirloom tomatoes where you don't talk as much about like the floral, like you don't hear really people talking about like as specifically for tomatoes as they would with wine or coffee.
Right. Well, I mean, we definitely try to do that with corn, and usually in the raw state, you can actually get quite a bit of flavor difference just across varieties. It's really, my dentist has asked me to stop chewing on raw kernels, but like it's a still thing. I still do it, so just don't tell her. But yeah, you can definitely start to get a lot, even without developing that flavor through cooking. It tastes amazing, and then when it interacts with the cow or any alkali material is going to really accentuate that flavor. It activates all of the the different amino acids that are linked to flavor and aroma compounds. Those just explode in the process of nixtamalization. So it's there are different steps where you can kind of start to see that flavor development. And we talk about like the barnyard notes in a blue conico, for example. The chocoyul that Olivia was talking about has almost like a raisin.
The sweetness in it.
Yeah, it tastes like raisins. Like it really, no kidding, and transfers into the masa so beautifully. So I think it obviously is subjective, but you can certainly, if you're paying attention and you're mindful of anything you're doing, you'll start to kind of notice not just subtleties, but they'll become more aware to you as like very seismic differences. And that's true with corn.
On a similar note, how does freshness affect the flavor? Like if I buy masa harina from Masienda, how is it going to taste different than buying the same corn and nixtamalizing and grinding it myself?
It's a great question. I mean, there are so many more variables when you're doing something. When you're buying masa harina, basically all the variables have been fixed for you. Right. The only one you can really control is, if you want to add seasoning to it and the amount of water you're putting into it.
Right.
There are so many steps before that we have kind of had to jigger to get it to be what it is, and to also function on a line, like a production line that makes that possible. So the differences are mostly, I think, some of the biggest differences. Yeah, there's actually a lot. You could, we use a very small amount of calcium hydroxide, the cal, to do it on that line, the way that the production line is configured to do that.
Uh-huh.
You know, some people like a little bit more calcium hydroxide, maybe a little more than 1%. I think it takes away from the flavor of the corn, so we typically keep that right around 1%, but that's something that some people play with. I'd say texture is a really big one. You know, masa harina it's a fine flour usually, and ours is no exception. So, you know, it's great. It definitely absorbs moisture really quickly, but I also like, frankly, like the bite that comes from a little bit more, like a slightly coarser grind. And there's something about, there is no substitute at the end of the day. Like a freshly made, you know, masa from Mixtimalizing is amazing. The way starch is when it's like just freshly made is always going to be better, whether that's, you know, masa or pasta or, you know, rice or whatever. Masa is no exception to that. But it's pretty darn good and pretty consistent and close to getting something that feels like a really big step up from, you know, tortillas from.
Yeah, I think with masa harina you get a perfect consistent product, and then once you're having and you're grinding the nixtamal, you can adjust the texture of it. Just like Jorge said, it can be a little coarser, it can be super fine, really soft, and that changed the flavor. And also, you know, with fresh masa, you know, you can use different corns to really taste the difference in every. Yes, like the blue one or the yellow one, for instance. The pink one, like I mentioned, it's probably my favorite one right now. I think it's the sweetest one. I think the starch content in every corn helps you either to make tortillas or make more like tamales. And the aspect of every corn, yes, that's like when you start learning more about the corn itself, then you can say, okay, I can use this corn for this specific application. However, with masa harina, you can use it for everything. You can make tortillas, tostadas, tamales.
So Olivia, do you make fresh handmade tortillas for the restaurant, for Billy Can?
Not yet. We will. Not yet. We're in the process. The concept of it's a little different, the concept of the food in Billy Can, but there is room. There is room for tortillas. I think there's room for tortillas everywhere. But
I'd have to agree.
Well, it's a modern Texas restaurant. So because it's modern Texas, obviously there's Mexican influences. So you can always do that. But you will be also doing soon. You'll be doing some kind of tamales, right? The pineapple ones, or
yes, we're making some of the sweet tamales. I've been making a lot of tostadas lately, and it's probably what I'm gonna be using the most at the restaurant. To begin with, I just really love having the different types of colors. I just really like showing other people, you know, there is different corn, not only yellow, not only white, you know, it's just that there's more colors, that there's so much into it. And that's how you get to people. You know, when people gets to see it, to taste it, then you can explain the whole process. And it's not so hard.
Yeah. I was, when you gave me that masa the other day, there was some blue and some pink and some yellow. And at some point, and you know, when I was making the tetelas, so I was pressing tortillas for them. And at some point I didn't have enough for a whole tortilla of like the blue. So I took a little bit of the yellow and a little bit of the blue, and I made them together and I pressed it. It was such a beautiful tortilla. It was like all like
variegated.
Sort of, yeah. And then I was like, oh my God, I just want to do this one day. Just like make different colors and
tortilla art.
They were so beautiful. So I'm wondering if there's any other questions from. That's what you do? You mix the colors?
I love to play with mine. I'd love to make it and find out, you know, to get the best out of every single.
She's gone. I have an interesting, a couple of visual aids. One, I wanted to show you some, just some of the grains. These are the ones used for pozole. And Jorge, what are they called? Because I can't remember.
It's called cacahuacintle. It's
Yeah.
that's like the most kind of traditional pozole type of corn you can find in Mexico.
Yeah.
Really big, really floury. They expand quite a bit.
Yeah, and then also I
Hey, Les. I
Yeah.
just want to call your attention to a question. If there's
good.
time.
Okay. Okay. In the ask a question thing. Cool. Okay. This is from Wiley. Is sacrificing the purity of the tortilla for extra gluten worth it?
Yeah, and it sounds like this was related to a very controversial post that we did of a half flour, half masa tortilla, which it was a fun thing to do. So is it sacrificing the purity of the tortilla for extra gluten worth it? I think we wrote a blog post on this, and it's just the history of the 50-50 tortilla is that like some people who really like wheat tortillas say they don't like a corn tortilla because it breaks. And it was kind of just like a commercial, solution for a problem that didn't actually exist. It was just like honestly a way for supermarkets to just sell another product on a shelf and like, claim innovation. They're not like a traditional. I mean, actually, I wouldn't even say they're not traditional. People have mixed things into masa, for centuries, depending on, if you don't have enough corn, you need it to go around for your whole family. They'll incorporate, quelites or like, foraged greens. They'll incorporate, rice. They'll incorporate wheat. So this is sort of just a riff on that with something that is pretty polarizing if you are from Texas, especially. So I think that to me, there's a time and a place for a 50-50 tortilla. It's mostly just if I'm craving one, and I don't want to go through all the effort and I have extra masa. Like there was no hard and fast rule on it. I think it's mostly just fun. But I will say, man, our 50-50 tortillas are freaking good. They're so good with really good quality masa and a great quality flour. It's just like a really fun, it's a fun thing to play with every once in a while.
Yeah, we could do that with some of the locally milled flours that we're getting. Use that to make the flour part. But I'm sorry, Wiley, I cut off the beginning of your question because I didn't. But Wiley posted his whole question in the chat thing, so we see it there. Meanwhile, talking about craving.
I didn't answer. What happens when you play with the ratio? You get more. I mean, it's up to you. I mean, you obviously get more of one flavor than another. If you're working with more flour in that case versus masa, it'll start to develop this. That gluten will just have a different stretch and a different feel to it. So I'd say I like 50-50. It's a great compromise, but you can certainly adjust those to your liking and just know that if you're working on it, don't work for too long if there's a little bit more gluten in there, just so you don't overdevelop it, if that makes sense.
So it can get tough.
Yeah, so we'll play with that. Wiley's my son, so we can try that at home. So here's another visual aid. Are you guys seeing that the right way or backwards? Okay, so these are the chicatanas. I got so excited when I saw these on the Masienda site. I had only eaten them in Mexico, but I have to say that they weren't as, I think the ones that I ate in Mexico were not quite so large. Like these are big. Like they're big. I gave Olivia half of them. So I don't know. Olivia, what are you going to, and
Leslie, you have to explain that they're ants.
I'm sorry, they're ants. They're ants. Chicatanas are ants, and they smell like ants. They're really special, right, Jorge? I mean, I got very excited to see them, and there's a recipe for salsa I'm making them, which is what I had planned, but I don't know, like Jorge or Olivia, what are you going to do with yours? Oh, she's eating.
I don't know yet. They really smell like I was eating them earlier. They smell very similar to the chapulines. I don't know if you ever had the chapulines, the little crickets. I just have them in tacos, and they have a lot of texture. They're crunchy. You can just put them in a taco and salsa, and I'll be more than happy to eat them like that.
Yeah. Would you, I feel like I had them as garnish, like just on top of things in Oaxaca. Would I be remembering that right?
I've seen it as a garnish. When I went to eat to Puyol in Mexico City, they were, they make like a aioli with it. They make it aioli with it, and they put it in baby corn, and that's how they present it to you.
Yes.
Because they describing the like if you read the menu and it says corn and chicatana, ants and everything. I was like, where are they? Like, I don't see them. I don't see the ants, but they're they aioli. It's made with it.
Mm-hmm.
They but
kind of aioli again, like.
But I probably the texture is great. They crunchy. I really like the smell of it. I think just like tacos and salsa, it's perfect. So you don't need much about it.
Well, on that note, I think our time is up, but I want to first of all thank you guys all, everybody who has participated by just being here and watching and asking questions. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you Jorge and Olivia and Juliet for talking about masa and nixtamalization and chicatanas and everything else. That was so interesting and so great. So many thanks, and we'll be writing more about your products, Jorge, and we're linking to Jorge's store Masienda through our cook shop at Cook Without Borders, so you can get there directly. It just goes directly to Jorge's site, but and Olivia and I will be doing more masa recipes, more of Olivia's recipes that we'll be presenting soon on Cook Without Borders.
Thank you.
Using the Masienda heritage corn masa harinas. So thank you everybody, and
Thanks.
Thank you.
good evening.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.